My name is Luisa Herrera Martinez. I'm on the steering committee of the International Committee of an organization called DSA, and I'm here with my friend Tom.
Hi, I am Tom Wojak. I am a member of DSA International Committee. I am the co-chair of IC Americas, which oversees relations between North, Central, and South America. DSA is presently the largest leftist organization of its kind in the United States. We have about 95,000 members. Broadly speaking, it's a very, very large coalition of people from across the country. We have many people in office. We have many, many chapters across the United States that are all working to build a better life for the working people of our country.
Bernie Sanders is our most famous kind of representative of DSA. So, you know, I credit him. Also members of the squad. So, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I saw in my chapter the day we had a general membership meeting after she got elected, and it was like double the size. Like people just show up, they're really excited about it. But so that's partially explains some of our growth. Also Trump helped, right? People woke up and they saw the danger and they experienced it. And so that led to some of our growth. But then also we're not just, you know, we don't just elect people. We do community projects, we're really engaged locally. So if I'll give an example, in my chapter, we passed a referendum for universal preschool for all children in the county. It's universal, so it's not means tested. In Texas, where was it that we passed the sick leave? There was a sick leave ordinance we passed. What else have we done?
A very, very broad variety of work. The DSA engages in a broad variety of projects. Obviously, electoral organizing is one of our stuff, but we're also building relationships with the Latin American left. I think very vitally, we have a lot of organizers who are interested in immigration reform, the reforming of the broken immigration system for the United States. We have people who are involved in brake light clinics which, you know, keep police from pulling people over. So like I said, it's a very dynamic, multifaceted organization. And just speaking on the topic of DSA's growth, I think that more than even just one personality, you know, Bernie, Trump, any of that, the growth of DSA, the popularity of socialism, democratic socialism in the United States, can be directly traced to the deteriorating conditions of the United States. People are becoming very, very disillusioned with neoliberalism, capitalism as it is, and people are wondering if a better world is possible, and DSA says it is.
So if I could just briefly explain the history. So at its peak, it was 35% membership in the United States, right? This was the labor movement. So that's great. It's not a lot though. It's not like 50%. It's not like what you see in Bolivia and stuff like that. So there's different, you know, historical debates, but you know, really what happened was you had the Red Scare and you had all of these really tremendous dynamic labor leaders getting purged from all of these parties, right, getting deported. And so I attribute that to the reason for why the labor movement went to the right, and negotiations became less about worker control, right, and more about just getting better salaries and better working conditions, right? There's an ideological distinction between those two things. And so, you know, you had the Red Scare, you had, there's a great period, there was a long period of time where, you know, it wasn't very popular to claim to be a socialist or a communist, and now that's changing with young people for the reasons that Tom explained. Capitalism just doesn't, you just don't get the same benefits, particularly with the youth, right? We've become so disillusioned. No, you know, it's, nobody thinks they're gonna be able to ever afford a house or healthcare.
Student debt.
Student debt is out of the, we both have student debt, you know, like crippling student debt. I don't know about you, but, and so that's the reason why, and then with the help of people like Bernie Sanders, not to focus too much on individuals, but now there's more space for that type of socialist organizing.
There was a very, very intentional project in American history to excise any sort of leftist movement. And by the way, we're not even just talking about communism. We're talking about reforms of, universal healthcare programs, anything that would really, put any sort of power, any semblance of power into the control of the workers. And so again, for a long time, I always say that, Americans have kind of been a little lobotomized in terms of what they think is possible, right? We grew up, our generation grew up with one narrative, one story about capitalism, one theory of how the world can be organized. And it turns out that that those neoliberal structures are causing, tremendous pain for young people of all generations. And so, like I said, it's a response to policies that do not work, economic policies that do not value the workers, do not value the working people of this country, who make up the majority of this country. And so what we are doing, what organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America are doing, is resuscitating that tradition. And I think that in the past 6 years, there's been a remarkable resurrection of people who are interested in taking power into their own hands and into their own lives. So that is actually one of the things that I think makes DSA very, very dynamic. It's a big tent organization. All that is to say, and I'd be very curious to hear what you think as well. It's a sort of coalition of all these disparate leftist forces. Social democrats, there are anarchists in our organization. There are socialists, there are communists in our organization. There are people who joined because they heard Bernie talking about Medicare for all. And what that has produced is a sort of laboratory of American socialism, rather than having one specific line, rather than everyone following the exact same thought. That's not to say we don't have points of unity, but rather than everyone believing the exact same thing, we have different theories of change that we're constantly testing out in a variety of ways. And so, in another time, I'm sure you could have called it a united front, but that's simply the state of the left presently in the United States. But in so doing that, we are building a new tradition of, I think a very, very unique tradition of a U.S. brand of socialism.
So I can give you an example. So we work in the International Committee, and so there's people who have very different, very strong opinions about socialism in countries across the world. But one thing that we are unified on is that we are completely against legal sanctions, right? In Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, in Iran, in North Korea. And so that's like a point of unity where there is still a little bit of debate. For the most part, though, we agree. And so that's, for instance, that's the type of work that we do. So Tom,
absolutely,
works in solidarity with Cubans in Cuba, trying to end the blockade, and I do the same type of work in Venezuela.
And again, we understand that the left is a very, in every country is a very, very broad, spectrum of opinion. And rather than focusing on exclusively what makes us different, we see that there's a lot of power in focusing on what unites us. And a lot of what we've been learning with connecting to parties in Latin America is the discovery that my struggle in the US is very similar to the struggle of socialists in Mexico, socialists in Ecuador, socialists in Denmark. Because we're all governed by the same rules. We're all part of the same economic global hegemony that dictates a lot of our lives. And so, like I said, I truly believe that there is more that brings us together, not only just in the U.S., but globally speaking, and that's very exciting. It's still it's still something that it takes a long time. The process to reach some sort of consensus takes a long time. For instance, in my work, Cuba, right? I predominantly organize around Cuba solidarity, ending the embargo. Many people in our organization have a broad variety of theories, but ultimately we come together and unify under the banner of ending the embargo on Cuba. That is something that resolutely DSA agrees upon. We resolutely denounce. We've had resolutions. We've had on the local level, on the national level, many conversations. So, like I said, as we kind of exist in this milieu, we're coming to various forms of consensus, various conclusions, and it works better than you would think. You would think that, yeah.
We focus on points of unity.
Points of unity.
Right, and so but also people are elected for, we have to be sensitive to the demographic of the people that they represent, right? So I think there's some semblance of understanding around that, but it's an internal political debate, just like any other organization, right?
Just because we're socialist does not mean that the majority of the people living in our country is. And so, like I said, it's how do we advance our ideals in contrast, in spite of the political conditions of our country. I think that, again, this is something that is hotly debated in DSA. I do not believe we are close to reaching that sort of consensus, but like I said, I think that our project is one in its infancy. Even the project of consolidating all these leftist forces is a pretty Brobdingnagian task, considering the forces, surmounted against us. And, maybe one day we'll have enough power to do that. But like I said, for right now, that's something that's still hotly debated.
So we're the largest socialist group in the United States, but we're still pretty small, right? So for instance, for people that we elect, I think there's many members in DSA for them to have more radical positions on a number of, on police abolition, on Cuba, on Venezuela, But then the question becomes, do they have the support in their regions, right? They have the support in DSA, but do they have the support in their regions, right? With just normal, non-socialist, everyday people. And we're not at the point to which that we can support them, right, to take more radical positions. And even if they do, right, do they have the power to change things in Congress? Are there enough DSA members to be able to do that? And right now the answer is very clearly no. But what's great about DSA, right, is that the potential is there. We keep growing. That's the fact of it. Whether we plan for it or not, we keep growing. So there's hope there in a way that there wasn't so much in the 10, 15, 20 years Absolutely. Before DSA.
Even, I cannot stress enough, I've been a member of the Democratic Socialists of America for 6 years now, since 2016. I cannot communicate to, people living abroad enough how the political geography of my country has changed in that time. Certainly within DSA, just what is possible, right? And that's what DSA is trying to do. We're trying to expand the view of what the working American thinks is possible after a history of having that, forcibly removed from their political vocabulary. So, as Luisa said very, very well, very, very hopeful. We're building the infrastructure that is going to make us a political force in the country. And with that, we are going to advance all of those objectives of, worker liberation, of anti-imperialism, of basic human rights that, I think that some of which we see here in Mexico. Our projects are the same.
So I think in Chicago, there were a number of DSA members that were elected to city council, right? I can't speak too much about that. I can talk about Portland, Oregon, right, where the area that I'm from. One of the things we did was pass a referendum for universal preschool, right? And so we did that and it was expressly written this way, by taxing the top 2% in Multnomah County, right? So taxing the rights to provide universal preschool, so ages 2 to 4 for kids in Multnomah County, and it was universal. It's not means tested. So that's an example. We didn't need a socialist county council or city council to be able to do that, right? We had the people power, and this was actually in the middle of a pandemic to be able to do that. And so it is important to elect people, but that's not exclusively the focus of DSA. That we do other. We engage in different forms of electoralism that do engage people in their neighborhoods.
It's not a dichotomy. It's not the dichotomy of either we're all in for electoral politics or all in for a grassroots movement. I think the synthesis, and this is what I think DSA and other successful movements do well, is figuring out how our electoral projects can support our grassroots movements and how our grassroots movements can support our electoral projects. And that is what mobilization is, right? That is what will build institutions of socialist power in the United States.
And right now, because we're not as powerful as we will be one day, really our responsibility at the moment is to present alternatives, right? That's always been the responsibility of the left, is to provide alternatives that a different world, really deliver on the idea that a different world is possible. So right now, you know, we do work in neighborhoods. We do like mutual aid projects, most famously Texas. So like there was a cold snap in Texas, and the electricity, because it's privatized, went up. Like it was ridiculously expensive to like run electricity, and then the grid system was really poorly developed anyway. So DSA members in Texas organized, and they managed to provide really basic services to people in Texas in a way that the government was not able to deliver because they've been chipping away at the public infrastructure for so long. And so that's a great example of the way that DSA members were able to respond to an emergency in the way that, you know, a neoliberal government in the state of Texas just wasn't.
When you contrast mainstream Democrats or you know, mainstream Republicans, when you contrast their solutions to what the solutions that DSA is proposing, I think fundamentally, as conditions, like I said, are deteriorating in the United States, Democrats or Republicans cannot give a solution to those problems because fundamentally the problem is neoliberalism. The problem is capitalism, and these are two capitalist parties, certainly in the established sense. And so again, that the more people are disillusioned with the way things are, the greater their appetite is going to grow for radical change. And like I said, I think that socialism in the United States is ascendant. I think that DSA will have a very, very important role to play in that, and we're very, very fortunate to be doing it. Certainly when it comes to Cuba, I am actually one of the authors of something that was passed in 2019 called the Cuba Solidarity Resolution. The Cuba Solidarity Resolution states very, very expressly in condemnation of the illegal, immoral embargo against the Cuban people, one of the longest embargoes in Cuban history. We extend our not only our solidarity with the Cuban people, we are building, using our DSA infrastructure, ways of protesting the embargo, applying electoral pressure on the Biden administration to fulfill a promise that the Biden administration gave, which was that, you know, the Trump sanctions would be reversed, we would return to sort of the Obama era détente. And that simply hasn't happened yet. So all we're asking the Biden administration to do is keep one of their campaign promises and end the cruel, horrifying embargo that is the central cause of calamity on the island. DSA members feel very, very passionately about it. We're demanding ends to the medical embargo so that Cuba can import medical supplies, not only to treat their own people, but to, you know, treat many of the countries in Latin America in which Cuban doctors are operating. So as I said, that campaign has been very, very successful. There's a lot of momentum behind it, and I think people are going to be very impressed with the work that we do in the years to come. And Luisa is primarily responsible for the work in Venezuela.
Yeah, so about a year ago at this point, DSA famously sent a group of 8 people to Venezuela, and it was and Tom was there, we got invited to El Congreso Bicentenario de los Pueblos del Mundo, where we attended the conference, right? But then we also stayed afterwards and met with communes, with elected people, with women's groups who were doing work in the community. And then I stayed there some time afterwards too, just to stay there personally and meet with my own contacts. And so that was a huge deal within DSA. because that was just the first time that we had ever engaged in Venezuela in a real way, right, in a meaningful way. So right now, and so that the solidarity work, right, that is focused on ending the sanctions, the illegal unilateral sanctions against Cuba. I'm sorry, well, Cuba too, but Venezuela as well. That work is continued. So for instance, now I'm helping with a project where we'll be hosting 3 socialist feminist activists from Venezuela to tour the United States to meet with electeds, but also to meet with DSA members to educate about the effect of the sanctions, right? And how, and it's particularly, we're inviting feminists, or we're inviting women to talk about how the illegal sanctions disproportionately affect women and children in Venezuela. The fact of the matter is when you interrupt basic services, right? It's women who kind of take it on their backs to fill that gap. Also, the same thing with the medical embargo, it exists in Venezuela as well. And so, like, for instance, now Venezuela is like the #1 country in Latin America for teen pregnancy. That was not the case before the embargo, before the sanctions. Before, birth control was subsidized by the government. It was practically free in Venezuela. And so those are the types of things that people in the United States need to hear about, right? Because there was a greater period of time when people in the United States benefited from empire. It's not so much the case anymore. A lot of jobs have gone overseas, right? And the benefits are simply not the same. And not only that, the war machine is so great that we could pretty much get whatever we wanted in terms of basic human rights in the United States. Things that, healthcare, right, that more civilized countries take for granted is still a fight in the United States. We could fund all that if we just stopped the war machine, right? And so having people understand the United States that they personally benefit from ending imperialism overseas. It's not a charity. This isn't UNICEF, right? This is, you have a personal stake in ending imperialism.
And again, in speaking about the projects of socialism abroad and socialism in the United States, again, we see our struggles as very similar. We see much of what brutalizes the third world as what brutalizes people at home in the United States. And again, so if we share a common adversary in the system of global capitalism, then perhaps we can come together and come to a conclusion.
Yeah. The same violence that we face in the United States, we export to other countries. Yes. And we recognize that.
There is a very, very large very large percentage of people in the United States that are totally disheartened with the way things are, whether they know what its name is or not. The same changes that are happening everywhere else in the world are happening in the United States, and the path forward is either socialism or barbarism. And I have a lot of faith that the working people in the United States will choose their best interests.
For people from our generation, millennials and younger, socialism is not a bad word anymore. And that in and of itself is a cause for hope. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah.